All right, welcome to another edition of the Pat Dooley Show. It's the penultimate Pat Dooley Show. Of course, one more to go after this. Appreciate everybody for clicking on here. This is certainly a week where we're going to be curious to see how many people are in the stands. Florida coming in at 5-5 to face a Furman team that is not very good. They lost to Elon last week. That should tell you all you need to know about them. And, of course, the Gator Nation right now not very happy. And I think a lot of it's because of, and I was even joking with my boss. I go, you just ought to run my column on Sundays, the same column every week. It's the same story. There's an old Herman's Hermit song, Henry VIII. Second verse, same as the first. And that's what we're seeing with the Gators. They keep finding the same way to lose. Key penalties. They've cut down on penalties, but still key penalties. We saw this with the offsides on Dominic Easley and the false start on Xavier Nixon. Two huge penalties in that game. Their offensive line is still struggling. They're not very good. They switched it around again, put Winger at center, put Harrison at guard, and then he got hurt, and they brought in Kyle Coney. Well, Kyle Coney whiffs on a huge block that cost them 5 yards when they were trying to drive for the winning touchdown. You know, red zone issues continue to be a problem. You have a quarterback who can't get under center and tiny backs. Red zone's going to be an issue. I think there are plays you can run down there, but again, Florida's paying a lot of money for 4-yard passes on 3rd and 7. And that's something we saw in the Adazio where it's almost like he left the playbook behind. And I'm not trying to be too critical. The coaches deserve some criticism here. Will Muschamp deserves some. Charlie Weiss deserves some. You know, the players deserve some criticism. I'm hearing that there's not an all-in deal there, that some of the players the chemistry issues not good between some of the older players and the younger players, much like it was last year. And the result is what you get. The bottom line is I think what everybody is frustrated about more than anything. Not only that they keep losing the same way, undisciplined way, but that they aren't, it's not like they're way behind in the last 4 games, of course, the 3 losses, Georgia, South Carolina, and Auburn. It's not like they're yards behind them. They're right there with them in terms of talent. They're right there with them. I know the numbers are down, but they still had enough players to win those games, but they made mistakes. At Auburn, Chris Rainey's fumble certainly was a huge mistake. Their inability to get in the end zone. What they have, 4 fumbles on punt returns, and that was certainly a big factor. Turnovers continue to be an issue. It's just a repeat. It's just the same story over and over again. It's like we're watching a rerun of, I don't know, what's a bad sitcom? I mean, Hello, Larry or something. But there's no question that it's a frustrating year. Gator fans are upset. And what I have to say, and I'm going to probably write this at some point later in the year, the bottom line is, what does Will Muschamp do next year? Next year is going to be huge for him. We knew this was going to be a struggle with that schedule because they are behind Auburn, or Alabama and LSU. Everybody in this league's behind them, even Arkansas. Everybody wants to talk about Arkansas being a great team, and yeah, certainly their record is good, and they've seal clubbed some teams. But when they played Alabama, they get just totally destroyed. And I got a feeling LSU's going to do the same thing to them at the end of the year. So there's no question that Florida's not, I don't think they're as far behind everybody as some people think in terms of talent. You know, we've talked about this whole Urban Meyer myth that Urban left them a bare cupboard. It's not a bare cupboard. There's good players there. There's not enough of them. They have no defensive ends, and that's why Sharif Floyd's playing it end when everybody says he should be playing tackle. Well, then who are you playing it end? Me? I can't rush the passer anymore. And their offensive line was not recruited for this kind of offense. So they got to get a big back. They got to get better, stronger linemen. They got to get some ends in here. That's where recruiting is going to end. It may take a couple of years. But I think next year is important for Will Muschamp in terms of wins and losses, but also in terms of quit making the stupid mistakes. Win that turnover battle. You know, there's nothing worse than coming into a place and saying, here's what we have to do to be successful, and then not doing it. That makes you look like you're not doing a very good job. So we'll see how all that goes next year. But, of course, this week it's Furman. We'll see how – I mean, look, like I said, they aren't very good. Florida should get the win, become bowl eligible, almost assuredly going, I believe, to the Gator Bowl. The Gator Bowl wants Florida, believe it or not, because it's Florida, because you're still bringing in a team that's won 2 national championships in the last 5 years. You know, the fact that they're 6-6 if they lose to FSU is not good, but you still want Florida. It's a brand. We've talked about this with the Outback Bowl last year. The only way I can see it not being Florida there, of course, if they won their last 2, then all of a sudden the Chick-fil-A gets in the mix. But if they're 6-6, is if Tennessee beats Vanderbilt and ends up 6-6. If Tennessee can do that, they're going to travel and they're going to put people in hotels, as Florida's not, obviously. So that's the only fly in the ointment there. But it looks, if Florida can get by Furman, almost assuredly they'll be in the Gator Bowl. And you know, the one thing that's great about the end of the season as we wind down, 5 teams with a real legitimate chance to be in the national title game. Obviously, LSU and Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Alabama, Oregon, all with a chance. Depends on how it all plays out. It's what the BCS wants. You know, they want it to be like this. They think it's great, and you know, it is kind of exciting. I'm looking forward to watching it. I still would prefer a playoff, but Arkansas, as I said earlier, I don't think has any chance, because there's no way anybody in their right mind, no matter what happens, unless if Alabama wins out and Arkansas wins out and beats LSU, can put Arkansas ahead of Alabama. Alabama killed them when they played. There's no way you can do that, and I think that's where the human element will take place. And finally, this is an awful schedule. You know, Florida's playing a 1 o'clock game, and you're like, all right, I get to go home and watch football. It'll be great after the game. Boy, it's awful. This is the 12th game syndrome right here, where, especially in this conference, where so many teams are just playing cupcakes and saying, well, we get to play a 12th game. That's a money grab, and so we're going to go ahead and do that. And you end up with Furman coming here. For example, I think Samford is playing Auburn this week. So, yeah, it's not good. This is not a great schedule. Actually, the best game is probably Oregon-USC. That's a night game. We'll watch it, root against Lane Kiffin. All right, we'll be right back with 3 things. All right, it's time for 3 things, and number 1 on my list from the weekend is there's no question Steve Spurrier is a Gamecock, okay? You know, the giddiness he showed in beating Florida was something we really haven't seen that much of. I guess a little bit last year, but I had a conversation with Steve. He called Sunday to talk about the column I'd written for Saturday's paper about how I still think it's weird that Steve Spurrier's coaching against the Gators, and he kind of agreed with me, and he said, yeah, he said, you know, we go down to that reunion, the Silver 60s reunion every year, and we all put our arms around each other and sing, "We Are the Boys." Then we're back to being Gamecocks. So he's a Gamecock. He's not a Gator. He's not going to be a Gator until he retires. Then, when he comes back here, then he's a Gator again. But right now, people who say, well, Spurrier's always a Gator. No, he's not. He's a Gamecock. And don't forget that. He loves to beat Florida. Number 2, the Oklahoma conspiracy. And the reason I say this is there had to be something going on for Texas Tech to have beaten Oklahoma. Have you seen the scores of Texas Tech's games since then? It's unbelievable. Oklahoma State could have scored 100 on them if they really wanted to, if they put their foot to the gas pedal. But they only got 66 to 6. Well, I didn't even add it up. It's ridiculous how much the margin of victory is for Texas Tech the last 3 games. But this is after beating Oklahoma. Now, this is typical Tommy Tuberville. He always beats a top 10 team, and he always loses the teams he shouldn't lose to. And I'm not saying he shouldn't lose to Oklahoma State. Certainly he should. But just the scores, there's got to be something more to what happened in that Texas Tech-Oklahoma game. Don't forget that game was in Norman, too, where they never lose. Somebody please explain it to me. Was there a second shooter? There had to be something going on here. Finally, number 3, if you needed any more evidence that that Will Muschamp has some zook luck, as I call it, you saw it Saturday. Florida's in a regular defense. The ball is thrown for a quick throw by Connor Shaw. Sharif Floyd makes a great play, deflects it in the air. The ball's floating in the air, and you're like, is Florida going to pick it off? And it lands in a tight end's hands who's running across the field, oblivious to everything that's going on. Another example of how he just can't get any luck. And I'm not. This is not being detrimental to Ron Zook, because Ron Zook just had bad luck. I mean, we saw that in the Tennessee game, the FSU game here in the Swamp. Just bad luck. And we've seen it all year with Will Muschamp. He actually had an instant replay that didn't go against him, so maybe it was starting to turn there in the second half. But maybe he's getting all his bad breaks out in the first year. If that's the case, they'll be all right. But he's got Zook luck, and we talked about that in the press box with some of the other writers. Because I've been saying this for a while, and finally one of them leaned back and said, you know, you're right about that. This guy's not very lucky. So we'll see if maybe they can turn that around. All right, we got a great panel for you today. Chris Doering, the former Gator player, and Steve Russell from WRUF are going to join me. We're going to talk about our 5 topics coming up next. Okay, welcome back to the Pat Dooley Show. We got a great panel as always. We appreciate Steve Russell from WRUF joining us. You know him well. And of course, Chris Doering, former Gator and ESPN. What are you on?
TV Live? Yeah, I'm an ESPN employee there. Our show is distributed through CSS, but it's produced by ESPN.
Because that's what I thought, yeah.
ESPN Regional at Charlotte.
And you had the La Tech Ole Miss game.
La Tech, wonderful game between La Tech and Ole Miss. It was tough to commentate, and many of the fans didn't make it much through the game either. So I'm not sure how many people actually watched that.
What kind of crowd was it?
I would say probably half full, maybe. So,
so the Grove wasn't hopping?
The Grove was down. I was disappointed about that. That's my favorite. If you talk about places to go in the SEC, that's one of my favorite places. And unfortunately, the atmosphere is a little dead there.
I'm not surprised. It'll be interesting to see who their new coach is. I've got my thoughts on that. But let's go to
Kevin Sumlin, by the way. How about Kevin Sumlin?
Well,
He'd be a great Ole Miss
I said this last week. One thing that Ole Miss has to deal with is the fact that those players that are being recruited there still see the rebel flags. They still know the tradition of Ole Miss. Why you've got to go get an African American coach. Yeah. And Charlie Strong makes sense. Charlie Strong's in a conference, by the way, that could be evaporating. And Louisville's not going anywhere. That would be a great hire for them. But Kevin Sumlin, if they could get him, I know that Kevin Sumlin would say, it's a better job.
I think from a comfort standpoint, probably good at Houston. Having to play against Alabama, LSU, Arkansas every year, not so much.
Mike Leach?
Yeah, Mike Leach is a guy that has been named a bunch there. And that's something that Houston Nutt said is if you're going to go against Alabama and LSU every year, you can't beat them at their own game because they're going to have better players. You got to do it with a little different philosophy offensively. So I think it's a good thing.
The thing about Mike Leach is he wouldn't have to recruit well to be successful. He could take guys that aren't maybe that talented and make them work. So, but that's not even one of our panels. All right, let's start off with it. Is there a reason, and we'll start with you, Steve, is there a reason to think it will be better next year for the Gators? Obviously, at 5-5, it has been a tough season for everybody involved. But they lose Rainey, Demps, Jay Howard, Brantley. Have a sophomore quarterback next year. Is there a reason to think it's going to be better?
All those things you're telling me, no. But cautiously, yes, for a couple things. The schedule gets easier. You lose Alabama.
Of course, you don't really know what the schedule is.
We don't because of Missouri, but at least you're not going to play Alabama. You know that. So that's going to help a little bit. And I just can't think it's going to be this bad again offensively in a second year. I would think in the second year of the system, get a little bit better. Defensively, I think it'll be a little bit better. Cautiously, yes, but not by much. It's going to be a tough year again.
I said marginally better only because you look at what they're deficient of talent-wise. Offensive line is miserable. Wide receivers are non-productive. I don't know. You can go out and get receivers that can be freshmen and produce, but I don't know that you can do it on the offensive line. I think having a young quarterback, you're still going to go through a lot of the developmental issues that you saw this year. So, we go from 7-5 last year under Urban Meyer's group to either 7-5, 6-6. Hopefully not 5-7 here this year. But I don't expect it to be a big jump from this year to next year, just like it was probably a status quo move from last year to this year.
Yeah, in terms of the schedule too, we expect Alabama to drop off, and it's funny if Florida ends up hosting Missouri in the first year, they'll have 2 trips to Columbia, and then next year Columbia, South Carolina, Columbia, Missouri. So it can get confusing out there. All right, number 2 are on our panel discussion. Who is the most disappointing Florida player this year? And we're not trying to deride anybody, but everybody comes in with expectations. Everybody, and I got mine. We'll start with you, Chris.
Mine is a guy because I had him set so high that he, was tough to live up to. Jordan Reed's the guy that I'm disappointed with. I thought in Charlie Weiss's offense, from a pro style, NFL liked to use the tight end a lot. I thought he'd be a big play action contributor there. He's been inconsistent. You see flashes of him being great. You hear Coach Muschamp talk about needing to get the ball to him more, but there's things that I see in terms of blocking that he's got to get better at, and just his consistency is something that I'd like to see more of. But it's only because I set him up so high. There's plenty of guys that haven't played at the level he has.
Well, in the first half of the year, he was jumping for every pass. Yeah. Even the ball's down here, he was jumping.
That's part of the transition from being a quarterback to a receiver too. I am still of the belief that you can't just make anybody into a receiver, and so hopefully he's going to continue to gain some experience.
Spoken like a true receiver.
Yeah, exactly.
Not everybody can do what we do, right?
That's right. The sad part about this is there's a few candidates.
Yes.
I mean, it isn't like you got one that just stands out. But to me, it's Xavier Nixon. I mean, here's a guy who was, highly recruited and did a decent job as a young player. What's happened to him? How do you regress that much? I don't understand. The system can't be that different. Granted, the offensive line as a whole isn't really good, but he's just gone to pieces, and it's happened pretty quickly.
The interesting thing is he lost all that weight last year and then gained it back. Sometimes when you have that kind of a drastic weight change, we saw David Lee in basketball. He gained a bunch of weight because they wanted him to get him stronger. He couldn't play. He felt like he had a backpack of bricks on his back when he played. So sometimes that weight gain's not positive.
Yeah, I think it's something that has to be more gradual, too, than just a shorter period of time as well to learn how to play with either the higher weight or the lesser weight.
Right. I've got 2 guys. One is Quentin Dunbar, and the reason is he's almost – I think he's still playing on the team. I'm not sure. But, all we heard all spring, right? And okay, so we always know these phenomenons of spring.
Deontay Thompson syndrome from many years ago.
Then all summer, that's all we hear. Quentin Dunbar. Has he made a play all year? Not one.
Yeah, was he had 4 or 5 catches maybe?
Yeah.
Not,
and the other one, of course, Ronald Powell. I told everybody Ronald Powell's going to be all SEC.
But we need to go back and remember that first show we did with Jeff. I think we were all probably wrong.
Ronald Powell. Yeah, because every time I told we had Will on the radio show back when I used to do radio, and he was his voice would get higher when he talked about Ronald Powell. And then the Tennessee game, you go, okay, he's seen the light, and he's made like one play.
I've said this a lot, and I think Coach Burr used to preach to us. He said it was a John Woodenism. The coach's greatest ally is the bench, and because they don't have quality players in backup roles, they cannot take people out because they're not playing well. They can't take people out because they make the same mental errors, the penalties, everything else. All of that stuff goes uncorrectable because there's no recourse for the actions that happen on Saturday.
And that's what I got an email from a guy talking about Ronald Powell today, and he said, "Don't you think they should pull him?" And I'm like, "And put who in?"
Yeah, right. That's it.
O'Kine?
But here's the syndrome of the stars, the recruiting thing. He's all world. He's all this. He's all that. When he came to campus, I just didn't like his body language. I'm Ronald Powell. I'm the big 5-star guy. He's not lived up to that. He hasn't played very well at all. But you're right. Who do you put in there? There's nobody else to put in there.
Well, it was different. When I was in school, you may have catered to these guys when they're being recruited, but when they got on campus, they were humbled, like every other rookie freshman guy was. Nowadays, they have to continue catering to those guys because of their fragile mindset that's built up. And that's what happened with those guys. You remember those 3 guys when they came in? There were thoughts of them transferring, and I think Urban Meyer, Steph, and those guys had to kiss their butt so much it was almost a disservice to them.
Well, one thing Urban will do, he doesn't like to release players. He'll just say, "No, you work it out." Will's kind of taken the attitude of, "You don't want to be here, leave."
That's the old Spurrier guy.
Yeah.
And exactly. I think one thing Will is doing this year, and people may not want to hear this, I think he's weeding it out. And it may kill their numbers and it may kill this season. But from what I hear, there is a little bit of that last year syndrome going on. We're older guys and younger guys, and there are guys on the team that don't like each other, and maybe some guys who feel entitled. But entitled to what? I mean, you haven't done anything.
And maybe that's where they do improve, going back to the question number 1. Maybe they get that chemistry right during the offseason, and maybe that benefits them in one of these close games that they've lost this year.
I refuse to quote any player who preseason says, "We're much more together this year." Yeah. Because I've heard that for the last 2 years. and it hasn't.
Nobody actually knows until you get into the game, the adversity.
That's when you find out.
But would you agree with this, though? Have you seen Florida quit?
No, they played hard.
They played hard. Yeah. And I think that speaks to what the coaching staff is doing here. The kids have not quit on them. They haven't played well a lot of time.
But you look at the second half, they're down 14-3 at the half to South Carolina.
Yeah.
And we're all, I'm telling people in the press box, I'm going to start writing. This game's over. Florida can't score 14 points. I was right. But they played hard. Yeah. They allowed South Carolina 11 yards in the third quarter.
That's a reflection to the coaching staff. I mean, really the fact that they haven't given up and the fire that they play with, I think, is directly attributable to Will Muschamp.
Absolutely. All right, the third question for our panel, Georgia. Not Florida, Georgia. Georgia will be heading to the SEC title game. I say that with real conviction because I've seen Kentucky play.
You saw Vanderbilt beat them by 30. If you get beat by Vanderbilt by 30, it's probably not a good
you're probably not a good chance.
And I like Vanderbilt. I like James Franklin. He's done a good job.
Well, Georgia is going to probably play LSU or Alabama. I don't think Arkansas has any chance of leapfrogging just because Alabama beat them so badly. Do they have a chance to win that game in Atlanta?
I think they do have a chance. If you think back to the beginning of the season, that was a lot of people's favorite in the East. They have a lot of talent. I mean, having done their game last week, they have a tremendous receiving core. You think about Arkansas's receiving core. Georgia's is probably right there with it in terms of depth, maybe a little bit younger. Tyler Wilson, Aaron Murray, one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. If I had to name, 3 of them, he would be in the top 3. So I think Georgia may have a shot only because it's all between their ears. Right now, they believe they're a good team. If you believe you're a good team, it goes a long way.
What would a loss to Georgia Tech do? Would that, because you've got to think, as much as a rivalry game that is, Georgia's playing. Let's just say they know they're playing. Well, they won't know, but they know they're playing LSU or Alabama.
It's like us back in the day. Yeah. When we would play, we clinch, and then we play Florida State.
Right.
In that game before, we used to struggle with them, in 92, 93.
You pulled Shane at halftime.
Yeah, that was because Coach Spurrier didn't value the Florida State game then like he did starting in, 95, 96.
I think after 94, he got it.
Yeah.
But Georgia has a chance because you're playing. But look at it this way: who's Georgia beaten? Last
their
week,
best wins over Auburn.
I thought the same thing until I watched them dismantle.
pretty
Auburn
impressive.
last week, yeah.
But Auburn's
up there.
not very good. Now you're going up against a team that's really good, and they may be playing for something. They got to win to go. So all the incentive is on that team.
Think about the pressure though that goes along with that.
but all year long,
we did that in '95. We were undefeated, and we went in and played Arkansas, who was not a very good team. We as players didn't necessarily feel the pressure, but I remember hearing afterwards about how stressed Coach Spurrier was during the week. When you have so much on the line, that's why if you look at Oklahoma State and they make it through the Oklahoma game, they have no Big 12 game. It's such an easier path for those guys than it is anybody like Florida. I mean, like Alabama, LSU, and whoever represents the West.
Georgia's going to be loose.
Well, absolutely, and LSU or Alabama is going to feel a lot of pressure because this isn't just a win. The conference championship is almost irrelevant at that point. You're playing to go win a national championship.
But I do think when you play in this league and with the system we have, good or bad, there's pressure every week.
Yeah, there is.
LSU, Alabama, you got to win that game. If you don't, you're on the outside. You have to have help.
Look, and that's the reason why you look at just a couple weeks ago. There was 10 undefeated teams. Then it went to 8 to 6. Now to where we are now because the pressure. Who would have never thought that Boise was going to lose at home to TCU? The pressure that goes along with it just naturally erodes those undefeated teams when you get into November.
It does, and it leads us into our next question, which is for you guys to pick your national title games. I really think there's only 5 teams with a chance right now, but I don't think Arkansas can get in. I don't think Clemson certainly can get in. So
Arkansas can't get in.
Yeah.
Alabama beat you, like you were saying.
Unless
earlier.
Alabama lost. Who do they play this week?
I don't know who Alabama plays this
They
week.
don't play anybody.
No, nobody plays anybody
I
this
think
week.
actually they play Ole Miss.
It may be.
No,
LSU
they beat Ole Miss. Alabama
LSU
beat the
plays
heck out of Ole Miss
yeah.
earlier in the season.
But at any rate, they could lose to Auburn and certainly be knocked out. But I think the problem for Alabama is if LSU wins out, even for the rematch, we've always kind of taken that philosophy. If you don't play in your conference championship game, after you play for the national title, who do you see when it's all said and done?
I'm going with the rematch game. My rematch is not LSU, Alabama, LSU, Oregon, because I think Oregon has a chance to continue to move up. And I was most impressed. They lost on a neutral site game to the number 1 team in the country. I think that their resume probably is the most deserving of getting up there of anybody of the one-loss team.
I want to make another point. Am I correct in this? No Big 12 title game.
Yeah, exactly.
See,
that is their Big 12 title.
that is.
Yeah.
That's it. So
It's
you win that, you're in.
Yeah. But the thing that's interesting to me is I think you have to go back and look at if you have a bunch of 1-loss teams, who'd they lose to? Alabama losing to LSU, no shame in that. Oregon losing to LSU, no shame in that. If LSU loses to Arkansas, no shame in that. Oklahoma losing to Texas Tech, a lot of shame in that.
Well, that reminds me of 2008 when Florida loses at home to an unranked Ole Miss team, and I know the scenario probably worked itself out a little bit differently. But at the time, I remember thinking, this is very similar to what we saw in that year, and I think Oklahoma still to this day is one of the top 3 teams in the country.
But somebody's going to have to explain that to me.
How they
look at the scores of Texas Tech Simpson.
Yeah.
It's like 1,000 to 2.
Obliterated.
They're terrible.
Yeah.
They're terrible.
They are, but that's Tuberville. I was going to make a point about Georgia. Now I totally lost it. But so we'll move on to our last question, and that is should Kentucky punt Joker Phillips? And I don't like to call for coaches' heads, but if I'm a Kentucky fan, administrator, I'm looking at the fact that you were going to play Vanderbilt, and okay, this is a chance to salvage your season, and you didn't show up at all. You didn't show up.
Well, the problem is there's a couple things. One, you look at the talent that Kentucky lost last year with Locke, and you saw last night what's
he needs to quit. He needs to quit doing that because I got Aaron Rodgers on my fantasy team.
They've taken away.
He runs back a punt. Aaron Rodgers not getting.
But I mean, that was a pretty good team that he lost a lot of members of. The problem, though, is this is another one of those situations where they named the coach in waiting. And Rich Brooks had done a great job of bringing that program along. But Joker Phillips kind of was the de facto guy to just take it over and keep it rolling. Unfortunately, he's not Rich Brooks, and they've regressed a little bit. So I don't know that he'll be fired this year. I think next year probably will be his do or die year, though, in Kentucky.
I thought Kentucky made the right move by keeping Rich Brooks. I did. They are, look, their fans sleep half the time. They can't wait for basketball to start. So they stuck with Brooks, and it was rewarded. They had bowl teams. Now, around here, no.
He was about to get canned there.
Yeah, he was.
Remember, he comes to SEC Media Day, and he walks in the big room, and he goes, I'm back.
Yeah. And he did great. And he recruited, look, Andre Woodson, Jacob Tenney, some of those guys, very good players. Well, Joker Phillips went there. He was on that staff. He knows the kind of player Kentucky can get. Where's he getting them? He's seemingly not recruiting those players, or they're not coached up. I'm with you. I don't normally like to fire coaches, but I think Pat's point's valid. Are you telling me that Vanderbilt is that much of a juggernaut where you're going to go and not show up? You can't do that.
Well, he's a victim of Rich Brooks' success, too. As you mentioned before, they could have cared less. Although they have decent fans for teams that are the lower tier in the SEC, their fans are decent in Kentucky. But I think that obviously that bar got raised a little bit with those couple bowl appearances that they had, and them to fall back as much as they did, I think it probably is pretty indicting.
I would say they're the worst team I've seen in the SEC for a long time, but Ole Miss is in the league, so you can't say that.
Right. Ole
Miss is terrible.
But here's the thing at Ole Miss, though. You look at their roster, they have a ton of freshmen. They played a bunch of they started 4 true freshmen on defense. They got this Nick Brassel kid who's he's playing both ways. He's an amazing talent. Their quarterback situation is abysmal. But I think that whoever inherits that Ole Miss job is going to have a leg up. And what happened with them, they started being able to recruit the Mississippi area better than what Dan Mullen was. Dan Mullen had a lock on that his first couple years, but they out-recruited Mississippi State. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't be surprised to see Dan Mullen end up in Arizona here in the offseason.
Really?
But Nutt
you heard it here first.
Nutt lost his team with the Mazzoli thing.
He did.
Absolutely.
He denied it. I asked him that. He said he was a great. Everybody looked to him. He was a great leader. But what happened was he didn't develop a guy for this year, and that's where I think he kind of admitted to that fact, is that it set them back in terms of development. But you look at.
That's the thing. When you bring in Mazzoli, you're saying it's a 1-year Band-Aid.
Right.
And forget about.
And the guy who was going to be your quarterback leaves. He transfers. Now, what do you have left?
They've had 8 or 9 different starting quarterbacks here in the last 2 seasons. It's been a merry-go-round at that position.
No question. One thing about Joker Phillips, though, that when we're in SEC Media Days, James Franklin speaks. He's got it. There's something you're sitting there and you're going. He might turn them around. Yeah. Just listening to him, Joker Phillips, you don't feel that.
He doesn't have the same.
Of course, Gene Chisholm doesn't have it either.
Yeah, I never thought he would have been any good there either. But James Franklin, we did their game. I did the last 2 Vanderbilt games last season under Robbie Caldwell, and that was a program that was on the same level as Ole Miss this year and all in Kentucky.
Awful.
But you sit down with James Franklin, and he makes you believe.
Right.
He said, why not here at Vanderbilt? We have the greatest academics in the SEC. He's convincing these kids the same way he's convincing us that they can be a contender, and I think they've shown it this year.
And the other thing about that is there's no Warren Norman there this year.
I know.
I mean, that's a quality special teams guy and a really good player, and they're winning without him.
Yeah.
And normally at Vanderbilt, one guy goes down, you're done.
If you have success at Vandy, you're not going to be there for long.
All right, that's going to do it for our panel. We really appreciate Chris Doering and Steve Russell for joining us. Great stuff from the guys. We'll take a break, come back with the list. Okay, it's time for the list. And again, want to thank Chris Doering and Steve Russell for coming in. Great stuff from them. And to all my panels. These guys have been great to take their time to come in. Next week, Neil Anderson and Lee McGriff will for our final Pat Dooley Show of the Year. And we appreciate everybody for coming in. And we appreciate you guys for clicking on as well. Today, the Heisman race, I don't know that I've ever seen it so wide open. I have no idea who I'm going to vote for. But right now, I just wanted to give you a hint on what my ballot would look like. Right now, I got number 1, I got Brandon Weeden. I mean, his numbers are incredible. They're undefeated at a school where, going undefeated doesn't happen all the time. I know he's an older guy and everything, and it's a Big 12 where nobody plays defense, but you got to give this guy an awful lot of credit. I don't want to hear product of the system. Product of the system makes me want to puke. I'm tired. Anybody who says that, I eliminate their input, because everybody's a product. Tim Tebow was a product of the system. Danny Werfel. Peyton Manning was a product of the system. They're all products of the system. And, that's just, you have a system and you put your guys into it and you recruit for them. So, but Weeden, I'm very impressed with this year. Obviously, that Oklahoma game, he can win the Heisman there. We've been saying that about a bunch of guys this year and none of them have done it. Number 2, I've got Andrew Luck still in there. Just because he had turnovers in the biggest game of the year, I know that's a sign where you kind of go a red flag. well, look, he turned it over 3 times in the biggest game of the year. They got beat. They still put up points. They put up 30. It was his defense that really let him down, although he didn't play at a high level. He did against Southern Cal in another huge game, overtime game. I still, again, mainly from default, still have him in there. I've also got number 3, Case Keenum at Houston. I mean, 9 touchdowns in a game, that gets you on my radar right away. I don't care who you're playing. I don't care about your system. He's done a great job. Great story, 6-year senior, and came back from that torn ACL. Good guy. I know, again, the competition, not great. We all know that. But I really want to see Houston go undefeated and play somebody in a big bowl game and see how he does against them. Number 4, I've got Sammy Watkins still on my radar. I know he got hurt in the last game. I'm hoping he'll be able to come back just because I want to see him finish out this season. But for a freshman to come in there, and every time Clemson's needed a big play, he's delivered. And that's amazing for a freshman to be able to do that, getting behind guys time and time again. You know, they're what are they, 8-1 now? And it's a lot because of Sammy Watkins. Taj Boyd is a guy who is just outside my top 5 because he's done some great things too, and Clemson is one of the great stories. And number 5, I still have Trent Richardson under consideration. He didn't do a lot against LSU, but it wasn't like he was awful. It wasn't like he kicked the ball a few times. He had a hard time breaking free. Well, everybody does against that secondary. I'm not going to really hold that game against him. He played better against Mississippi State, of course, and he's the guy, the running back I would least like to face if I was a defender, if I was trying to coach up a defense, because he's that good. So those are my 5 right now, but there's still 3 games left for a lot of these teams. Obviously, Florida's will end after 2 more weeks, but we have the SEC championship game, the Pac-12 championship game. Does Michael James get back on my radar? The game he played against Stanford kind of puts him on the fringe, so it's still so wide open. I have no idea who's going to be on my ballot and in what order, and so we'll have to keep it. And we haven't got our ballots yet, so we'll have to wait for that as well. That's going to do it for the penultimate Pat Dooley show of the year. We appreciate, again, Chris Doering and Steve Russell for being on. Don't forget, next week, Neil Anderson, Lee McGriff to finish it up. We appreciate everybody for clicking on. And until next time, Pat Dooley, sports columnist of the Gainesville Sun, saying so long from the Sunshine State.